We often mistake volume for authority and rigidity of strength. History is littered with the names of men who commanded legions, built monuments to their own ego, and demanded absolute fealty. But if we peel back the veneer of the strong men, we rarely find a foundation of granite. Instead, we find a hollow core. Today, we are exploring the authoritarianism of small men. This isn't necessarily a commentary on physical stature, though history has its ironies, but rather a study of psychological smallness. It is the phenomenon where a deep-seated sense of inadequacy is transmuted into a hunger for total control. Why is it that the most fragile egos require the most absolute power? At the heart of the petty autocrat lies what Alfred Adler named, or termed, the inferiority complex. For the small man, the world is a constant threat to the self-image he knows, deep down to be fraudulent. Authoritarianism is not an expression of power, it is a compensatory mechanism for the lack of it. A man who is truly secure in his masculinity, his intellect, and his own social standing has no need to coerce the environment to validate him. He can withstand dissent. But the small man, to him, dissent is not a difference of opinion. It is an existential threat, because his identity is built on the sand of insecurity. Even the slightest breeze of criticism threatens to topple the entire structure. Thus, he creates a world where criticism is illegal, and his greatness is a legal requirement. How does this weakness manifest in behavior? It follows a predictable pattern. First, hyper-performative masculinity. The small man must constantly signal strength because he does not possess it naturally. This results in the caricature displays we see in dictators, the staged hunting photos, the military regalia on a man who never saw a day of combat, the aggressive rhetoric. Second, the need for total uniformity. Difference is a terrifying thing to the weak. Uniformity provides a protective shell. If everyone thinks, speaks, and acts like the leader never has to face the reality of his own limitations. Lastly, the micro-tyranny. We see this not as just in the heads of state, but in the small men of everyday life. The abusive manager, the controlling patriarch. They obsess over minutiae. Why? Because controlling small things provides a temporary dopamine hit, a potency that masks their internal helplessness. The smaller the man, the greater the need for a tall pedestal. There's a profound irony in the authoritarian's quest for order. The small man is usually a victim of his own internal chaos. He is a slave to his impulses, his envies, and his fears. Because he cannot govern his own psyche, he attempts to govern the world. He projects his own weakness onto others, labeling his enemies as soft or degenerate to distance himself from those very qualities within himself. True strength is integrative. It can hold complexity and nuance. The small man's authoritarianism is reductive. He must shrink the world down to a size he can manage. He demands a black and white reality because he lacks the intellectual and emotional muscle to navigate the gray. We must ask a chilling question. Why do societies follow the small man? The answer lies in a shared pathology. The small man's authoritarianism offers a sanctuary for other small men. By projecting a facade of absolute serenity, he relieves his followers of the burden of freedom. For those who feel equally small, displaced by modernity, intimidated by complexity, or stung by their own failures, the small man's rage feels like a proxy for their own. He gives them permission to be their worst selves under the guise of strength. This creates a symbiotic fragility. The leader needs the crowd to tell him he is a god, and the crowd needs the leader to tell them they are special. It is a collective delusion built to stave off the terrifying reality of their own individual insignificance. We must stop being intimidated by the roar of the autocrat. Start recognizing it for what it is, a distress signal. The small man in power is a tragic figure, trapped in a cycle where no amount of external validation can ever fill the void of his internal inadequacy. He is not a wolf, he is a frightened creature wearing a wolf's skin. When we understand that authoritarianism is the ultimate symptom of weakness, the strong man loses his greatest weapon, our belief in his strength. Real power is quiet. Real authority is comfortable with its own availability. The small man, however, must remain loud, for if the room ever goes quiet, he might finally have to hear the sound of his own insignificance. To understand the small man, we must understand his relationship with the quote-unquote image. Because he lacks an internal North Star of character, he relies entirely on his reflection in the eyes of others. This is the hallmark of the fragile narcissist. In an intellectual sense, the small man does not exist unless he is being observed. This creates a desperate, ravenous need for a personality cult. While a truly great leader might be content with a quiet legacy of efficacy, the small man requires a cacophony of praise. He mistakes obedience for love and fear for respect. But there's a spiritual exhaustion in this, because the strength is external, vested in titles, uniforms, and the silencing of critics. It requires constant maintenance. The small man is the most hard-working actor in his own play, terrified that if he drops the mask for even a second, the audience will see the trembling child behind the curtain. There is an inherent brittleness to this kind of power. In material science, strength is often defined by flexibility, the ability to bend under stress without breaking. The small man's regime, however, is made of cast iron, seemingly hard, but prone to shattering under a single, well-placed blow. Because his authority is rooted in insecurity, he cannot delegate. He cannot hire people smarter than himself, as their competence is an insult to his ego. He surrounds himself with yes-men, intellectual sycophants who filter the truth to protect his feelings. This creates an information death spiral. A small man becomes a prisoner of his own propaganda. He makes decisions based on a reality that does not exist, leading to the inevitable collapse of his projects, his companies, and his countries. The tragedy of the small man is that he destroys the very thing he seeks to control, simply because he is too weak to let it breathe. Look back at history's most brutal strongman. We don't see giants. We see men who were so terrified of their own shadows that they tried to blot out the sun. Their legacy is never one of creation, but of subtraction. They take, they restrict, they censor, and they diminish. True strength is generative. It seeks to empower others because it is not threatened by their growth. It is expansive, not contractive. The next time you encounter man demanding absolute control, demanding that you shrink so that he may feel large, look closely at his hands. You will likely see them shaking. He is not master of the world. He is a servant to his own fear. And the moment we stop fearing his fear, his power vanishes like smoke. For the small, authoritarian man, a dog is not a companion. It is a prop, a subject. If you wish to see the small man's authoritarianism in its most primitive, unvarnished state, look to his dog. To a secure man, a dog is a partner, a creature of distinct agency and shared affection. For the insecure authoritarian, a dog is a utility for the ego. Because the small man feels diminished by his peers and intimidated by his superiors, he seeks a relationship where his supremacy is biological and absolute. The training style of the small man is rarely about communication. It is about breaking the will. He does not want a dog that obeys out of bond. He wants a dog that cowers out of reflex. He often demands unnecessary, rigid displays of obedience in public. not for the dog's safety, but to demonstrate to onlookers his capacity for total command. There is a specific pathetic cruelty in the man who mistreats a dog. It is the only arena where he is guaranteed victory. When he strikes or berates a creature that cannot argue back, he is participating in a pathetic catharsis. He is taking the humiliations he suffers at the office, in his marriage, or in his social circles, and downwardly displacing those in the resentment of a captive audience. A man who can only feel like a master when he is standing over a cowering animal is a man who knows deep down that he is a slave to his own fear. In the eyes of his dog, the authoritarian finds the only mirror he can tolerate, one that reflects a god. Even if that god is a tyrant, it is the ultimate indictment of his character, that he must reach so far down the biological ladder just to find someone he can look down upon. How do you dismantle a giant who's made out of glass? You do not use a sledgehammer. That only validates his delusion of being a martyr or a dangerous foe. Instead, you use the most potent weapon in an intellectual arsenal: indifference. To destroy the ego of the small man, you must understand that he feeds on your reaction. Whether you fear him or hate him, you're giving him weight. To diminish him, you must follow a threefold path of psychological destruction. The authoritarian's greatest fear is not rebellion, it is absurdity. Rebellion implies he is a serious threat. Ridicule suggests he is a joke. When you point out the gap between his grandiose rhetoric and his mundane reality, the ill-fitting suit, the desperate need for a dog to cower, the fragility of his temper, the spell of strength breaks. The small man is a stage performer. If the audience leaves the theater, the play ceases to exist. By refusing to engage in his manufactured dramas, by ignoring his provocations, and by treating his commands as the background noise of a child's tantrum, you starve his ego of its oxygen. Finally, you diminish him by forcing him to stand on his own merits. Strip away the titles, the symbols of office, and the borrowed authority of his pets or sycophants. Ask the simple, quiet question that requires depth, nuance, and character, the qualities he does not possess. When a small man is forced to navigate a world of true competence and genuine empathy, he naturally shrinks. He becomes a ghost in a time machine he can no longer operate. In the end, we do not need to destroy the small man. Time, reality, and his own internal rot will do that for us. Our task is simply to stop participating in the lie. True strength doesn't need a script, a pedestal, or a victim. It is comfortable in the silence. It is a small man who must scream into the void, terrified that if he stops, the world will finally see him for what he truly is: small, weak, and ultimately inconsequential.